came to marry you. I'm the girl you saved 20 years ago." These words make a ruthless mafia boss burst into tears when a mysterious woman reveals the crescent-shaped scar on her wrist. She infiltrated his world with forged credentials, determined to find the teenage boy who carried her from the flames 2 decades ago. But what started as a mission of obsession becomes a dangerous game when she discovers he's arranged to marry the daughter of his greatest rival. As their forbidden attraction ignites, shocking truths emerge. Her father wasn't an innocent victim in that fire. He was an undercover agent whose actions killed members of the Mafia boss's family. And all along, the Mafia boss has been secretly watching over her from the shadows. When his uncle plots to eliminate her during his sister's wedding, everything erupts in bloodshed and betrayal. Can love born in childhood trauma survive the violent world he rules? And when he takes a bullet meant for her, will his empire of darkness finally find redemption through the one pure choice he ever made? Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Manhattan apartment, Miriam watched the city lights flicker like distant stars. Her fingers traced the weathered edges of the newspaper clipping she'd carried for years. A grainy photo of the Ricci family compound in Sicily. The paper had yellowed with age, but the image remained sharp in her mind. She moved to her desk, where her meticulously forged portfolio lay next to a one-way ticket to Palermo. Each credential had been crafted with precision, glowing recommendations from prestigious events, photos doctored to show her coordinating high-profile weddings, and a list of exclusive vendor connections that would impress even the most discerning client. The crescent-shaped scar on her wrist caught the lamplight, and memories flooded back unbidden. Smoke so thick it burned her lungs, the crack of timber as their home collapsed around them, and those eyes, dark, intense eyes that belonged to the teenage boy who'd appeared like an angel in the inferno. 20 years of obsession had led to this moment. She'd spent countless nights piecing together fragments of information about Emilio Ricci, news articles about his meteoric rise through the ranks of Sicily's most powerful crime family, business announcements of legitimate enterprises expanding under his control, whispered stories about rivals who'd mysteriously disappeared. Her research had been methodical, starting with the location of the fire and working outward through property records, police reports, and local news archives. She'd learned that the Ricci family had controlled that territory for generations. Cross-referencing dates and locations had finally given her the name she'd searched for, Emilio, the Don's son who'd been 13 at the time of the fire. The interview at the Ricci estate had gone exactly as planned. She'd worn a conservative black dress, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. The event coordinator, an older woman named Sophia, had been impressed by Miriam's knowledge of traditional Sicilian wedding customs. "The bride must carry something blue, something borrowed, and a piece of iron," Miriam had explained, her accent carefully neutral. And the guests should receive confetti flowers, 5 sugared almonds representing health, wealth, happiness, fertility, and long life. Sophia had nodded approvingly. "You understand our ways well for an American. I've made it my business to understand. The Ricci wedding will be the social event of the season. Everything must be perfect." When she'd mentioned her connections to exclusive vendors, florists who supplied the Vatican, vintners who saved their best vintages for select clients, Sophia's eyes had lit up. The job offer came within minutes. Now in her hotel room overlooking the Mediterranean, Miriam hung tomorrow's carefully chosen dress. The deep burgundy silk would catch the light just so, the cut modest enough for business but tailored to hint at the curves beneath. She'd selected it months ago, imagining this moment. Her hands shook slightly as she unpacked her makeup bag. The years of planning, of obsessive preparation, hadn't prepared her for the reality of tomorrow's meeting. She'd expected to work in the background, gradually maneuvering closer to Emilio through his sister's wedding preparations. The phone's sharp ring startled her. The caller ID showed the estate's number. "Miss Costello?" A clipped male voice. "Don Ricci would like to meet with you personally tomorrow morning at 9. A car will collect you at 8:30. Her heart thundered against her ribs. Direct access to Emilio wasn't part of the plan. It was better than she'd hoped. "I'll be ready," she managed, keeping her voice steady. After ending the call, she gripped the bathroom counter, staring at her reflection. The woman who gazed back had spent 2 decades becoming someone worthy of a Mafia Don's attention. Gone was the terrified child who'd lost everything in a single night. In her place stood a woman who'd learned to turn trauma into determination. She traced the scar again, remembering the moment he'd pulled her through the broken window. The glass had caught her wrist, but she'd barely felt it through the adrenaline. His arms had been strong even then, at 13. He'd carried her to safety while his father's men watched their handiwork burn. Later, she'd learned the truth about that night. Her father hadn't been the innocent accountant she'd believed him to be. He'd been an undercover federal agent whose investigation had threatened the Ricci family's operations. The fire had been a message, not an accident. But Emilio had defied his father's orders. He'd gone back into the flames for her. That one act of mercy had shaped both their destinies, though he couldn't know how completely it had defined her life. Miriam began her nighttime routine with deliberate calm. She laid out her clothes, checked her alarm, and reviewed her notes one final time. Every detail of tomorrow's meeting had to be perfect. She'd waited 20 years to look into those dark eyes again. Sleep would be impossible, but she forced herself through the motions of preparing for bed. Her mind raced with questions. Would he recognize her? Had he ever thought about the girl he'd saved? Did he know she'd spent years searching for him? Tomorrow she would begin to learn the answers. Tomorrow she would face the man whose single act of compassion had become her life's obsession. Tomorrow, Emilio Ricci would meet the woman who'd crossed an ocean to find him. The morning sun cast long shadows across Villa Ricci's imposing gates as Miriam's car pulled to a stop. 2 guards in dark suits approached, their movements precise and practiced. After a brisk security check, they escorted her up the winding driveway, their footsteps crunching against ancient gravel. The Mediterranean estate commanded its clifftop position like a modern fortress disguised as a historic villa. Bougainvillea cascaded down honey-colored stone walls, their delicate beauty contrasting with the subtle security cameras and reinforced windows. The sound of waves crashing against the rocks below carried on the salt-tinged breeze. Inside, the villa's grandeur unfolded in waves of old-world luxury. Renaissance paintings adorned walls covered in silk damask. Antique Murano chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across marble floors. Every detail spoke of generations of wealth and power, carefully curated to intimidate without appearing gauche. Miriam absorbed it all while maintaining her professional mask. Her heels clicked steadily across the marble as she followed a stern-faced maid through a maze of corridors. She'd memorized the estate's layout from architectural plans, but experiencing its scale firsthand made her pulse quicken. The maid gestured her into a study that opened onto a terrace overlooking the sea. Miriam's breath caught as she saw him, Emilio Ricci, standing with his back to her, hands clasped behind him as he gazed out at the water. Even from behind, power radiated from his broad-shouldered frame. "Don Ricci," the maid announced. "Miss Costello is here." He turned, and 20 years of imagination collided with reality. Those eyes, dark as she remembered, but now set in a face hardened by power and ruthless experience. High cheekbones cast shadows across skin tanned by the Sicilian sun. A small scar near his jaw hinted at violence survived. "Miss Costello." His voice was deep, accented, and utterly devoid of warmth. "You've impressed my staff with your credentials." No recognition flickered in his expression. Miriam had expected this, but it still stung. "Thank you for meeting with me personally, Don Ricci. I understand how valuable your time is." She opened her portfolio with steady hands, laying out her vision for his sister's wedding. Each detail had been researched and calculated, traditional enough to satisfy family expectations, while incorporating modern elements that would appeal to a bride of Gianna's age and sophistication. Emilio listened with obvious disinterest, occasionally glancing at his phone. But when Miriam mentioned specific preferences she'd noted about his sister, her fondness for white orchids, her secret desire for a less traditional wedding dress, his attention sharpened. "You seem unusually well-informed about my sister's tastes," he observed, studying her with new intensity. "It's my job to understand my clients, Don Ricci. The details matter." Before he could respond, the study door opened. An older man entered, his silver hair and expensive suit marking him as someone of importance. "Forgive the interruption," he said smoothly, "but there is an urgent matter requiring your attention, Don Ricci." "Salvatore." Emilio nodded to his consigliere. "Miss Costello will continue this discussion over dinner tonight, 8 o'clock. The invitation caught her off guard. A small victory, but an important one. I would be honored. The afternoon found her touring the estate's grounds with Gianna Ricci, whose cool politeness barely masked her suspicion. The bride-to-be was beautiful, with her brother's dark coloring and an edge of steel beneath her sophistication. "Your ideas are interesting," Gianna said, examining the mood board Miriam had prepared. "Though I wonder why an American planner is so invested in Sicilian traditions." Miriam seized the opening she'd been waiting for. "I've always felt drawn to Sicily, perhaps because this is where I lost my parents, a house fire, when I was very young." She watched from the corner of her eye as this information rippled through the staff within earshot. Gianna's expression remained neutral, but her posture tensed slightly. As evening approached, Miriam prepared for dinner with meticulous care. She chose a black dress that walked the line between elegance and modesty, paired with a loose silver bracelet carefully selected to slide down her wrist at the right moment. The estate's private dining room glowed with candlelight, but Miriam's heart sank slightly when she saw the full table. Emilio sat at the head, flanked by Salvatore and other men she recognized as his inner circle. This wasn't an intimate dinner, it was an evaluation. Wine was poured as business discussions flowed around her in rapid Italian. Miriam participated when addressed, letting her carefully constructed background withstand their subtle probing. She noticed Salvatore watching her with particular interest, his shrewd eyes missing nothing. The moment came naturally as she reached for her wine glass. The silver bracelet slid down exactly as planned, revealing the crescent-shaped scar that caught the candlelight. She took a deliberate sip, allowing time for the mark to be noticed. Through the candlelight, Emilio's voice cut off mid-sentence. His wine glass hung suspended, dark, liquid catching the flame's glow as his eyes locked onto Miriam's exposed wrist. The scar tissue gleamed silver against her skin, its crescent shape unmistakable. Silence spread across the table like spilled wine. The other men continued their conversations, but Emilio remained frozen, color draining from his face as recognition flickered in his dark eyes. Then, just as quickly, shutters slammed down behind them. His jaw tightened, suspicion hardening his features into granite. "You were saying, Don Ricci," Salvatore prompted, glancing between them. Emilio's glass touched down with precise control. "Yes, the shipment from Naples." His voice was steady, but his gaze kept returning to Miriam throughout dinner, tracking her smallest movements like a predator. Miriam maintained her composure, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She participated in conversations about the wedding, about Sicily's changing seasons, all while feeling the weight of Emilio's scrutiny. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass, and she saw his eyes narrow at this sign of weakness. Before dessert was served, Emilio dismissed his men with a sharp gesture. "Leave us. Miss Costello and I have wedding details to discuss." Salvatore hesitated, but a look from his Don sent him and the others filing out. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving Miriam alone with the man who'd saved her life, and now might end it. "Tell me about your background in event planning," Emilio said softly, dangerously. "Your experience with Sicilian weddings, specifically." Miriam drew on years of rehearsed answers. "I apprenticed under Marina DeSantis in New York. She specialized in traditional Italian ceremonies. And before that," he swirled his wine, watching her over the rim. "Your childhood, perhaps? Foster homes, mostly." This part was true. "After my parents died. In a fire." His voice was flat. "Yes." "How convenient." She met his gaze steadily. "Life rarely is." The interrogation continued, Emilio probing her story for weaknesses while never once mentioning the scar they both knew he'd recognized. Miriam walked the razor's edge between truth and fiction, letting real emotion color her responses while protecting her deeper motives. Finally, he called for a car to return her to her hotel. Miriam maintained her professional smile until she was safely in her room. Her hands shook as she kicked off her heels and poured herself a drink, replaying every moment of the evening. Had she revealed too much? Not enough? The way he'd looked at her scar told her he remembered, but his suspicion suggested her plan might be backfiring. She'd known the risks when she'd chosen this path, but theory was different from reality, especially when reality involved one of Sicily's most dangerous men. Sleep came in restless bursts. At 2 a.m., heavy pounding jolted her awake. Before she could reach for her phone, the door burst inward. Black-clad figures swarmed her room, efficient and silent. Rough hands seized her arms as someone zip-tied her wrists behind her back. A hood dropped over her head, plunging her into darkness. They hustled her downstairs and into what felt like a vehicle's trunk. Fear clawed at her throat, but underneath it ran a current of grim satisfaction. She'd predicted this might happen, had planned for it even. That knowledge helped her maintain control as the car wound through what she guessed were the estate's back roads. When they finally stopped, her captors marched her up steps and through echoing corridors. The hood was ripped away, leaving her blinking in the dim light of Emilio's study. He stood behind his desk, dressed in black pants and a crisp white shirt despite the hour. A knife gleamed in his hand, its blade catching the low lamplight. Her pulse jumped as he moved around the desk, circling her like a shark. His footsteps were silent on the thick carpet. She forced herself to breathe steadily as he came to a stop behind her. the knife's cold edge pressed against her throat. 20 years is a long time to hold a grudge, he said, his accented voice glacial. Who sent you? Which family thinks they can use the past against me? Miriam remained silent, feeling the blades kiss against her skin. His free hand gripped her bound wrists, making her gasp. No one sent me, she managed. The knife pressed harder. Lies will only make this worse for you. In one swift motion, he cut through the zip ties. Before she could react, his hand clamped around her wrist, fingers digging into flesh as he examined the scar. The touch sent electricity racing up her arm, part fear, part something far more complicated. Tell me who you really are, he growled, before I decide you're not worth the trouble of keeping alive. His grip tightened painfully, but Miriam forced herself to meet his gaze. In the study's shadows, his eyes were black with barely contained violence. The boy who'd saved her was there somewhere, buried beneath years of blood and power, but right now she faced the Don who'd built an empire on ruthless efficiency. The blade pressed against her throat, but Miriam kept her voice steady. I'm the girl you saved from the Palermo fire, the one you carried out when everyone else was running away. I came to find you, Emilio. I came because I finally remembered your face. His grip on her wrist tightened, but the knife didn't move. That girl disappeared into the system 20 years ago. Foster care, she corrected. 5 homes in 8 years, the last one in Brooklyn. The pressure of the blade lessened slightly. What else do you remember? Smoke, heat. Miriam closed her eyes, letting the memories surface. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor. The stairs were already burning when I woke up. I was wearing pink pajamas with white clouds. Emilio circled to face her, knife still ready. Many people could have learned those details. You found me hiding in my closet, she continued. I was holding my stuffed rabbit, the brown one with the missing ear. You said. She swallowed hard. You said, close your eyes, Piccola, don't look at the flames. The knife lowered an inch. Go on. You carried me down the back stairs, using your shirt to cover my face. When we reached the garden, you set me down by the old olive tree. That's when... She gestured to her scarred wrist. A burning branch fell. You pulled me away, but not before it caught me. Emilio's face remained impassive, but something flickered in his dark eyes. The scar could be manufactured. You wrapped it with your own shirt sleeve, tore it right off your arm. The fabric was black, but the inside was red silk. Miriam met his gaze. Custom made, you said when I asked why it was so soft. The knife dropped to his side. In one fluid motion, he stepped closer, his free hand coming up to grip her chin. He studied her face intently, and Miriam forced herself not to flinch as his thumb traced her cheekbone. Your eyes, he murmured. They're the same impossible shade of green. I used to see them in my dreams, watching me from the smoke. His hand fell away abruptly. He turned to pace the study, knife glinting as he gestured. Do you have any idea how dangerous it was to come here, to infiltrate my home? I spent years searching for you, Miriam said. Once I had a name, a location, I couldn't stay away. Why? He whirled back to face her. What do you want from me? I needed to know who saved me, why you were there that night. Emilio's jaw tightened. You should have left the past buried. Like you did? Miriam challenged. You recognized my scar immediately. You've thought about that night too. I thought you were dead. The words burst from him with unexpected force. The police came, the firefighters, but no one ever said what happened to the little girl with green eyes. He moved to his desk, pressing a button on the phone. Salvatore, arrange a suite in the family wing. Miss Costello will be staying with us indefinitely. That's not necessary, Miriam started. It's not a request. Emilio's tone brooked no argument. You'll remain here while we verify your story. Your work on Gianna's wedding provides reasonable cover, but make no mistake, you're not leaving my sight until I'm satisfied you are who you claim to be. Within minutes, guards arrived to escort her back through the villa's marble halls. The suite they led her to was luxurious, all cream silk and antique furniture, but the heavy click of the lock behind them made its true nature clear. Miriam spent the rest of the night pacing, her mind racing. She'd prepared for suspicion, even hostility, but Emilio's intensity was overwhelming. The way he'd looked at her, touched her face, there was more there than simple recognition. Morning brought a flurry of activity as hotel staff delivered her belongings. A maid efficiently unpacked her suitcase while Miriam watched from a velvet armchair, feeling oddly disconnected from the domestic scene. The door opened without warning. Emilio filled the threshold, his tailored suit emphasizing his powerful frame. He dismissed the maid with a gesture. "My security team is searching your apartment in New York," he said without preamble. "They're investigating every day of your life since the fire. If there's anything else I should know, tell me now." Miriam stood, smoothing her skirt. "I've told you everything important." "Have you?" His eyes narrowed. 20 years is a long time to chase a memory. "The question is," she countered, "when will you tell me why you were there that night?" Something dangerous flickered across his face. Without another word, he turned and left. The key turned in the lock, its sound echoing with finality. Miriam moved to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Below, guards patrolled the manicured gardens, their weapons visible even at this distance. Her gilded cage might be beautiful, but she was still very much a prisoner. She touched her throat where the knife had rested, remembering the intensity in Emilio's eyes when he'd recognized her. She'd known finding him would be dangerous, had prepared for violence, even death. But nothing had prepared her for the electricity that sparked between them, the way her skin had burned under his touch. The game she'd planned to play suddenly felt far more complicated than she'd imagined. She'd found her savior, but the man he'd become was more dangerous than she'd dreamed. And based on his reaction, she wasn't the only one affected by their reunion. The first rays of sunlight painted the Sicilian sky in shades of amber and rose as Miriam stepped onto her balcony. The cool morning air carried the scent of jasmine from the gardens below, where movement caught her eye. She gripped the stone railing, transfixed by the scene unfolding beneath her. Emilio moved with lethal grace among his security team, his white shirt damp with sweat as he demonstrated combat techniques. His controlled violence was mesmerizing, each strike precise, each counter-move calculated. When he took down a man twice his size, the crack of body hitting earth echoed across the garden. There was no trace of the polished businessman now, only the predator beneath the designer suits. A knock interrupted her observations. A maid entered with breakfast and a schedule for wedding preparations. Miriam forced herself to focus on the day ahead, though her mind kept drifting to the display of power she'd witnessed. The morning proved challenging as she attempted to coordinate with various vendors. Gianna's interference was subtle but constant. The florist suddenly became unavailable. The caterer's proposals mysteriously disappeared. When Miriam presented alternative options during their meeting, Gianna's perfectly manicured nail tapped against her coffee cup. "How convenient that you know so much about Sicilian traditions," she remarked. "For an American." "I did my research," Miriam replied evenly. "Did you?" Gianna's smile didn't reach her eyes. "And what else did you research about our family?" Before Miriam could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Guards rushed past the windows, weapons drawn. Shouts in rapid Italian filled the air as security teams mobilized across the grounds. Emilio burst into the room, phone pressed to his ear. Gone was any trace of the man who'd questioned her so intimately last night. His face was carved from stone as he barked orders, coordinating the response with military precision. "Lock down the East Wing," he commanded. "No one leaves their position without my direct order." Miriam watched his transformation, understanding for the first time the true scope of his power. This was the dawn of the Ricci family, the man who controlled half of Sicily through fear and blood. The hunt lasted less than an hour. Miriam observed from her window as guards dragged a struggling figure toward the main house. Later, whispers among the staff revealed it was an assassin from the Vannucci family, their longtime rivals. Emilio called an emergency meeting in the Grand Salon. "The estate is on complete lockdown," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "No one enters or leaves until after Gianna's wedding. No exceptions." "That's 6 weeks away," Miriam protested. "You can't just—" "I can and I will." His eyes locked onto hers. "Consider yourself fortunate you're here as a guest, rather than in my interrogation room." "A guest?" She laughed bitterly. "Locked in my room at night, watched every moment of the day." "Your past buys you certain privileges," he said coldly. "Don't test their limits." Throughout the day, Miriam observed the staff's divided loyalties. Some jumped to attention when Emilio entered a room, while others seemed to take their cues from Salvatore, who moved through the chaos with calculated calm. As night fell, Miriam saw her chance. The guard rotation she'd noted left a 3-minute gap in surveillance of the eastern garden path. She slipped from her room, using the shadows and hedges for cover. The perimeter gate loomed ahead, moonlight glinting off its wrought iron bars. Freedom was just steps away when a familiar voice froze her in place. "Running already?" Emilio emerged from the darkness, his tone deceptively calm. "You claimed you wanted to find me, and now you can't wait to leave." I wanted to find you, Miriam said, standing her ground. Not become your prisoner? Is that what you think you are? He moved closer, and she fought the urge to step back. After all the trouble you went through to get here, I have a life, a job. You have what I allow you to have. His hand shot out, gripping her arm. The touch was firm but controlled, like everything about him. You think you can walk into my life, turn everything upside down, and simply leave? His next words carried the weight of both threat and promise. Nobody walks away from me. Especially not you. Moonlight carved shadows across his features, and in them, Miriam saw what she'd been looking for. A crack in his armor, a glimpse of the boy who'd carried her from the flames. His grip betrayed him, not painful but desperate, as if he feared she'd disappear like smoke. Take me back to my room, then, she challenged softly. Lock me up again. Prove that's all I am to you. Another possession to control. Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion too complex to name. His fingers flexed against her skin but didn't release. They stood suspended in the garden's shadows, the weight of 20 years hanging between them, neither willing to break first. The morning sun cast long shadows across Emilio's office as Miriam entered, her chin held high, despite expecting punishment for last night's escape attempt. The room breathed power, dark wood panels, leather-bound books, and a massive desk that dominated the space like a throne. Emilio stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back. His tailored suit couldn't quite hide the warrior's build she'd observed during his morning training. Your dedication to finding escape routes is admirable, he said without turning. But I have a better use for your skills. He finally faced her, dark eyes unreadable. You're now my personal assistant, in addition to planning Gianna's wedding. Consider it an opportunity to prove your loyalty. And keep me under closer surveillance, Miriam added. His smile was sharp. Smart girl. Get changed. We leave for a meeting in 30 minutes. The sleek black Maserati purred through winding coastal roads, Miriam beside Emilio in the back, while armed guards followed in separate vehicles. She'd chosen a conservative gray suit that whispered elegance without drawing attention. These are delicate negotiations, Emilio explained, reviewing documents. The Russo and Calabrese families are traditional allies, but recent disagreements have complicated matters. The meeting took place in a centuries-old villa overlooking the Mediterranean. Security teams patted them down before entry, though they barely dared touch Miriam once Emilio's gaze hardened. Inside, she observed the power dynamics at play. 3 capos, each flanked by advisors, stood as Emilio entered. Their respect was evident, but so was their wariness, like wolves acknowledging the alpha while watching for weakness. Don Ricci, the eldest greeted. And who is this unusual addition to your team? My special consultant, Miss Costello. Emilio's tone discouraged further questions. Miriam stayed silent through the initial pleasantries, studying the room. The negotiation centered on shipping routes and protection payments, with underlying tensions about territory expansion. When the Calabrese capo made an aggressive demand about port access, she noticed something in the trade reports others had missed. She touched Emilio's arm lightly, a bold move that drew sharp looks, and whispered her observation. His expression didn't change, but he smoothly incorporated her insight into his counteroffer. The deal was sealed within minutes, leaving the other families with less than they'd demanded while believing they'd won concessions. In the car afterward, Emilio studied her with new interest. Where did you learn to read shipping manifestos? I worked at a freight forwarding company in college, she said. You learn to spot patterns. You're full of surprises, Piccola. The childhood endearment slipped out, and something flickered across his face, a crack in his armor. I had to be resourceful after the fire, she said softly. No parents, no family. His hands tightened on his phone. You survived. You became strong. Like you. She met his gaze. The boy who risked everything to save a stranger. That boy died in his father's punishment chamber the next day. His voice was flat, but his eyes held shadows of old pain. Remember that before you romanticize the past? Back at the estate, Miriam searched for Gianna to discuss flower arrangements. Voices from Emilio's study made her pause, an argument in rapid Italian between him and Salvatore. The Venucci alliance is crucial, Salvatore insisted. Their shipping routes, their Russian connections. I don't trust Paolo Venucci, Emilio growled. Trust isn't relevant. The marriage contract is already drawn up. Lucia arrives next week to finalize details. The ceremony is scheduled for the Saturday after Gianna's wedding. Miriam's heart stuttered. An arranged marriage, to the daughter of a rival Don. Her careful plans crumbled like ash in her mouth. "And if I refuse?" Emilio's voice was dangerous. "Then we face war on 3 fronts," Salvatore replied. "The Venuccis will align with our enemies. You know this is the only way." Later, Miriam sat on her balcony, watching stars emerge over the Mediterranean. 6 weeks had seemed like plenty of time to execute her plan. Now she had barely 2 weeks before Emilio would be promised to another. She'd spent years imagining their reunion, crafting the perfect strategy to make him fall in love with her, but she'd never considered he might not be free to choose. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Gianna entered without waiting for permission, her silk robe whispering across the tiles. "He paces the halls at night," she said without preamble. "Ever since you arrived. I hear him walking past my room at 3, 4 in the morning. He hasn't done that since we were teenagers after—" She stopped abruptly. "After the fire?" Miriam asked. Gianna's perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together. "My brother hasn't slept through the night since you arrived. Whatever you did to him 20 years ago, it broke something in him that never healed." She moved closer, her perfume expensive and threatening. "If you're playing games with him, I'll make you regret it. Emilio has enough enemies without adding a ghost from his past to the list." She paused at the door. "And watch yourself around Uncle Salvatore. He's been asking questions about your background. He never asks questions unless he already knows the answers." The door clicked shut, leaving Miriam alone with the weight of unspoken threats and the ticking clock of Emilio's impending engagement heavy in her chest. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow across the ballroom of Palermo's grandest hotel. Miriam adjusted the emerald silk gown Emilio had selected, a designer piece that probably cost more than her yearly rent in New York. Her reflection in the gilded mirrors showed a woman transformed, dangerous in her elegance. "Smile," Emilio murmured against her ear, his hand possessive at the small of her back. Everyone is wondering who tamed the beast enough to earn a place at his side. The annual Ricci Foundation Gala was in full swing, Sicily's elite mingling with calculated precision. Here, Emilio played the role of respected businessman perfectly, his tailored tuxedo and charming smile masking the predator she'd witnessed breaking a man's fingers just yesterday during a business disagreement. "Don Paolo Venucci approaches," Emilio warned quietly. "With his daughter." Miriam straightened as the distinguished older man approached with a striking brunette in red. Paolo's smile didn't reach his eyes as he kissed her hand. "So, this is the American event planner causing such a stir. My Lucia was quite disappointed to hear her services weren't required for Gianna's wedding." "Father," Lucia chided smoothly, but her assessment of Miriam was razor-sharp. "I'm sure Miss Costello is perfectly adequate for the task." The tension crackled between them. Lucia's designer dress and perfect makeup screamed old money and careful breeding. Everything about her declared she was born for this world, the world Emilio was expected to rule with her at his side. "More than adequate," Emilio said, his tone carrying a warning. "Miriam has exceeded all expectations." Lucia's perfectly painted lips tightened at his use of Miriam's first name. The possessive way his hand stayed at Miriam's waist clearly bothered her more than she wanted to show. As the evening progressed, Miriam was introduced to a parade of business associates and family allies. She cataloged names and relationships, noting who deferred to whom, who masked hatred behind social smiles. Francesco Russo, a shipping magnate in his 40s, proved particularly persistent. His eyes lingered too long, his compliments becoming increasingly bold, despite her clear disinterest. When he accidentally brushed against her at the bar, Emilia materialized like a dark angel of vengeance. "A word, Francesco." It wasn't a request. Miriam watched them disappear into a private alcove. Minutes later, Emilio returned alone, adjusting his cufflinks. The sound of pained cursing drifted from the alcove. "2 broken fingers," he told her casually. A reminder that some things aren't for sale or sampling. She should have been horrified. Instead, heat pooled in her belly at his casual display of possession. Was that necessary? In my world, absolutely. His dark eyes held hers. "Touch what's mine again, and I'll remove his hands entirely." The drive back to the estate was tense with unspoken words. As soon as they entered his study, Miriam rounded on him. "You can't just maim people because they flirt with me." "I can and I will," he loosened his bow tie. "Every show of disrespect must be answered with decisive force. That's how this works." "Is that what you learned the night of the fire? Violence as the answer to everything?" His expression shuddered. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then tell me," she challenged. "What really happened that night?" Silence stretched between them. Finally, he poured 2 fingers of whiskey and handed her the glass. "It was my first lesson in family business. My father brought me to watch, to learn how we dealt with federal informants." The crystal tumbler nearly slipped from her fingers. "My father was an undercover agent who'd infiltrated our organization." His voice was gentle despite the brutal truth. "I didn't know that part until I was older. That night, I just knew I was supposed to watch a man burn alive with his family. But you saved me instead." "I did." He drained his glass. "My father beat me unconscious for that defiance, but that night changed everything, seeing what we really were, understanding what I'd have to become to survive." Miriam's heart ached for the teenage boy who'd lost his innocence saving her. "You had no choice." "There's always a choice." His smile was bitter. "I chose to become so powerful, no one could ever force me to watch something like that again. Every brutal thing I've done since then was my choice." The walk to her room was heavy with revelations. They paused at her door, the air charged between them. His scent, expensive cologne and whiskey, made her dizzy with wanting. "Why did you really come looking for me?" he asked quietly. "The truth this time." She met his gaze, offering a partial truth that wasn't a lie. "Because every man I've met since that night has felt like a shadow. I needed to know if you were real or just a creation of my trauma." His hand lifted, hovering near her cheek without touching. "And now that you know?" The question hung between them, loaded with possibility and danger. Miriam stood perfectly still, her pulse thundering as his fingers remained suspended in that almost touch, both of them balanced on the knife's edge of whatever this was becoming. "Your new accommodations will be more suitable," Emilio announced, standing in Miriam's doorway at dawn. His presence filled the space, leaving no room for argument. "The move happens now." 2 stone-faced housekeepers appeared behind him, already gathering her belongings. Miriam watched them efficiently pack her life into expensive leather bags she hadn't owned yesterday. The suite, adjoining Emilio's personal quarters, was 3 times the size of her previous room. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Mediterranean. The furniture was antique, the fabrics luxurious, a gilded cage crafted for comfort. "Security reasons?" she questioned, noting the connecting door between their rooms. "Among others." His smile held no warmth as he demonstrated the lock, on his side only. Throughout the day, Miriam shadowed Emilio through a series of business meetings. She watched him negotiate shipping routes with the cool precision of a chess master, each move calculated 10 steps ahead. "The Colombian connection needs restructuring," he told his captains. "Too much exposure through the traditional channels." His men nodded, respect and fear mingling in their expressions. When one suggested maintaining the status quo, Emilio's response was immediate and brutal. "The last man who ignored my warning about outdated methods disappeared," he said softly. "Along with his entire crew. Modernize or vanish. Your choice." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Miriam observed how he wielded power, not through loud dominance, but with quiet certainty that his words were law. Later that night, unable to sleep in her new quarters, she found light spilling from his study. The door was ajar, offering a view of Emilio at his desk. Several empty glasses kept company with a bottle of 30-year-old scotch. Spread before him were weathered police reports, their edges worn from repeated handling. "Come in," he said without looking up. "You've been standing there for 2 minutes." She approached cautiously, recognizing the report's dates. "The fire. I've collected every document, every witness statement." His voice was rough with alcohol and something darker. 20 years of searching for you." "Why?" She moved closer, drawn by the raw emotion in his tone. "Because you were the first person I saved instead of destroyed." He looked up then, his eyes haunted. "My father ordered no witnesses, said we couldn't risk anyone identifying us. I watched him burn other families before that night. Watched and learned to be stone. But you saved me. I broke every rule we live by." His laugh was bitter. "The beating I took was worth it. You were my one act of defiance, my only clean choice in a lifetime of blood." She reached for him, but a sharp ring cut through the tension. His phone displayed an emergency alert. "Attack on the shipment from Naples," he reported, instantly sobering. 3 men dead. The next day brought chaos. Salvatore paced Emilio's office, agitation visible in every movement. The Venucci's won't wait. Either announce the marriage immediately or prepare for war. After Gianna's wedding, Emilio insisted. That was the agreement. Agreements change. Salvatore's gaze shifted to Miriam, especially when certain distractions threaten family interests. That evening, Miriam helped Emilio dress for the emergency, meeting with Paolo Venucci. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted his tie, too aware of his proximity, his scent, the heat radiating from his body. If circumstances were different, he began, his voice low. But they aren't, she finished, forcing herself to step back. His phone buzzed. The Venucci's had arrived. Emilio caught her arm as she turned to leave. Come with me tonight. His expression was calculating yet intense. I want Paolo to see exactly why his daughter's claim might not be as secure as he thinks. Understanding dawned. He was marking his territory, using their connection as a weapon. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but her heart raced at his implied claim. You're playing a deadly game, she warned. I've been playing deadly games since I was 13. His thumb traced her pulse point. But this is the first time I've actually wanted to win. Servants appeared with a gown, deep red silk that whispered wealth and power. As she changed, Miriam considered the precipice they stood upon. Emilio was choosing to display her openly challenging both the Venucci's and his own family's expectations. It would either shield her through his obvious claim or paint an even larger target on her back. The gown fit perfectly, another reminder of how thoroughly he controlled every detail. When she emerged, his sharp inhale was deeply satisfying. He offered his arm with old-world formality. Ready to make Paolo Venucci question everything he thinks he knows about me? She placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, feeling the steel of his muscle beneath fine wool. Ready to make everyone question everything. They descended the grand staircase together, a united front facing the gathering storm. Through the windows, Miriam glimpsed sleek black cars arriving, the Venucci delegation coming to demand their due. Emilio's grip tightened fractionally on her hand as voices echoed from the entrance hall. The private dining room at Ristorante Mare glowed with understated elegance, crystal and silver catching the warm light. Miriam sat rigidly at Emilio's right hand, feeling the weight of Paolo Venucci's calculating stare across the pristine tablecloth. Lucia's perfectly manicured fingers gripped her wine stem too tightly, hatred radiating from her perfect posture. The wedding preparations for my daughter are quite advanced, Paolo mentioned casually, though his eyes were sharp. The Versace atelier has already begun her gown. My sister's wedding takes precedence, Emilio replied smoothly, his hand brushing Miriam's knee under the table. Family tradition demands it. Traditions can be flexible. Paolo's smile didn't reach his eyes. When circumstances require adaptation. The waiter appeared with the first course, tension momentarily broken by the presentation of delicate seafood dishes. Miriam noticed Emilio's security team positioned strategically around the restaurant's perimeter, their attention more focused on the other, diners than their meals. The alliance has been discussed for years, Lucia interjected, her voice honey-sweet but eyes cold as she glanced at Miriam. Surely a few weeks won't... The windows exploded inward. Glass rained down as black-clad figures burst through multiple entry points. Emilio's reaction was instantaneous. He tackled Miriam to the floor, covering her body with his as gunfire erupted. The heavy table flipped, providing cover as his security team returned fire. Stay down, he ordered, already drawing his weapon. A bullet splintered the wood inches from his head. More shots, more screaming. Through the chaos, Miriam glimpsed Paolo dragging Lucia toward the rear exit. A gunman appeared from behind a pillar, taking aim. Without hesitation, Emilio fired twice, the threat dropping before his finger left the trigger. Kitchen, he commanded, guiding her in a low crouch. Move! They were halfway there when Emilio jerked violently. Dark red bloomed across his shoulder, but he didn't slow. If anything, the injury seemed to fuel his lethal focus. He took down 2 more attackers, one-handed, while shepherding her through the service entrance. Commercial-grade stainless steel offered momentary sanctuary. Staff huddled beneath prep stations, wide-eyed with terror. Emilio's breathing was labored, but his grip remained steady as he led them toward the loading dock. Cars waiting in the alley, he said through gritted teeth. 3 steps down, then 6 meters to... Another gunman appeared in their path. Emilio's shot caught him center mass before he could raise his weapon. They burst into the night air, finding Emilio's driver already opening the armored vehicle's door. The estate's doctor was waiting when they arrived, summoned by a terse phone call during their escape. Emilio refused to be treated in the medical wing, insisting on his private quarters instead. His shirt, ruined by blood and bullet holes, dropped to the floor. Miriam helped clean the wound while the doctor extracted the bullet, trying not to focus on the map of old scars across Emilio's muscled torso. His jaw clenched, but he made no sound throughout the procedure. "Clean through and through," the doctor reported, applying bandages. "No major damage, but you'll need to rest the arm." Emilio dismissed him with a nod. Silence fell as Miriam gathered the bloody gauze, hyper-aware of their solitude in his personal space. The adrenaline still coursed through her veins, making her hands shake slightly. "You're unhurt?" he asked roughly. She nodded, unable to look away from a drop of blood trailing down his chest. "Because of you." "I seem to make a habit of saving you," he said with dark humor. The distance between them vanished. Neither could say who moved first, but suddenly his uninjured hand was tangled in her hair and her fingers pressed against his bare skin. The kiss was desperate, violent with need, inevitable as gravity. All their careful restraint burned away in the face of almost losing each other. But even as she melted against him, Emilio stiffened. His hand dropped as he pulled back, expression hardening into something remote and cold. "I saved you once," he said bitterly, "only to drag you into hell with me now." "Emilio, this attack proves the alliance is more necessary than ever." His voice was flat. "The engagement to Lucia will proceed as planned." He turned away, dismissing her. Miriam fled to her room, but sleep proved impossible. Around midnight, she found herself drawn to his study, seeking answers about the man who'd risked his life for her twice now. The locked drawer in his desk proved little challenge for skills learned in foster homes. Inside, she found an obsession documented in paper and photographs. Every newspaper article about the fire, detailed reports on her family's history, surveillance photos tracking her life through the years, college graduation, her first apartment, job interviews. Emilio had been watching, protecting, following her journey from afar. "Find what you're looking for!" She startled at his voice from the doorway. Emilio stood motionless, face unreadable, as he observed the evidence of his fixation spread across his desk. Lightning flashed through the study windows as Miriam held up a surveillance photo, her hand trembling. It showed her leaving her favorite coffee shop in Manhattan just 3 months ago. "You've been stalking me for years," she said, spreading more photos across his desk. "Why not just approach me if you cared enough to watch over me?" Emilio remained in the doorway, thunder punctuating the tense silence between them. His injured shoulder was rigid beneath his fresh shirt, but his voice stayed controlled. "Would you have preferred I appeared in your life without warning? The violent criminal who's been monitoring your every move? Instead of playing guardian angel from the shadows?" "Yes!" Miriam gestured at the stack of reports. "You tracked my whole life, my jobs, my apartments, even my relationships. Why?" He crossed to the wet bar, pouring 2 fingers of scotch. "Because the fire that killed your father made you my responsibility." Lightning illuminated his face as he turned. "You think you were ever truly alone? That coincidence kept you safe in a world full of dangers you couldn't see." "What dangers?" 2 years ago, a Calabrian enforcer discovered your father was a federal agent. He planned to finish what we started that night." Emilio's eyes went cold. "I ensured he disappeared before reaching New York. Last year, someone tried selling information about you to the Venucci family. He had an unfortunate accident before completing the transaction." The storm crescendoed outside. A particularly loud crack of thunder made Miriam flinch violently, her breath catching. The sound triggered memories of crackling flames, of choking smoke and terror. The study's shadows seemed to ride like fire along the walls. Her chest constricted as panic clawed. Up her throat, the room spun as past and present collided. She was 15 again, trapped in an inferno, desperately seeking escape. Warm hands gripped her shoulders, anchoring her to now. "Breathe with me," Emilio's voice cut through the chaos. "You're safe. Focus on my voice." He guided her to the leather sofa, keeping steady contact as she fought through the attack. His touch was surprisingly gentle, thumbs tracing soothing circles on her arms, while thunder rolled overhead. "I was 13, he said softly, giving her something else to focus on. "My father brought me to watch what happened when someone betrayed the family. Your father's investigation had cost us a major shipping operation. It was meant to be my first lesson in how we handled threats." Miriam's breathing steadied as she absorbed this. "But you saved me instead. I saw you through a window, terrified and alone. In that moment, all my father's lessons about family honor felt hollow compared to an innocent life. His jaw clenched. He broke 3 of my ribs as punishment, said I needed to learn that mercy was weakness. What happened to him? She asked, though she suspected the answer. He died 5 years later, an unfortunate hunting accident. Emilio's tone left no doubt about the accident's nature. By then, I'd learned to channel my mercy more selectively. Lightning flashed again, but Miriam barely noticed, transfixed by his proximity and unexpected honesty. Is that why you watched over me? To prove mercy isn't weakness? You became my conscience, the one pure thing in a life built on violence. He reached up, knuckles brushing her cheek. Every time I considered crossing a line I couldn't return from, I remembered the girl I saved. It helped me build something better than what my father created, even if it's still stained with blood. Dawn's first gray light seeped through the windows, though the storm showed no signs of abating. Miriam realized they'd been talking through the night, emotional barriers crumbling with each revelation. And now? She whispered. What am I to you now? A complication, a temptation, a chance at something I'd convinced myself I didn't deserve. His thumb traced her lower lip. Meeting you again, it's forced me to question everything I've accepted as necessary. The alliance marriage, the endless cycle of violence, the sacrifices demanded by family loyalty. The storm's fury finally began to fade as exhaustion hit Miriam. Emilio insisted she take his bed while he dealt with storm damage reports. She was too drained to argue, sinking into sheets that smelled of him. She woke hours later to find the room empty but the balcony doors open. Emilio stood outside, watching his men assess fallen trees and debris across the estate grounds. His broad shoulders were tense beneath his shirt. I've postponed the meeting about the Venucci alliance, he said without turning. I told Salvatore I needed time to reconsider our options. Miriam stepped, beside him, heart racing. What does that mean? He finally faced her, dark eyes intense. It means I'm not ready to give you up, whatever the consequences. The declaration hung between them, heavy with both promise and danger, as weak sunlight broke through the dissipating clouds. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Ricci estate's manicured lawns as workers transformed the grounds into a wedding paradise. White roses and lilies cascaded from wrought iron arches, their sweet perfume mixing with the salt breeze from the Mediterranean. Miriam checked items off her clipboard, directing the placement of crystal centerpieces and champagne fountains. Despite her focus on final preparations, she found her gaze drawn repeatedly to the main house's western windows, where Emilio met with his captains. Even at this distance, his commanding presence was unmistakable. Each time their eyes met across the lawn, electricity crackled through her. These stolen moments had become precious, carrying the weight of unspoken promises and dangerous possibilities. Salvatore watched from the terrace, his weathered face tight with displeasure. His dark eyes missed nothing, not the lingering glances, nor the way Emilio found excuses to check the wedding preparations personally throughout the day. Between directing caterers and adjusting flower arrangements, Miriam and Emilio found brief moments of privacy in the maze-like gardens. Hidden by towering hedges, they shared whispered conversations about their past, their dreams, their fears. She learned of his passion for Renaissance art, his secret love of cooking, the weight of responsibility he'd carried since taking control of the family at 25. You make me remember who I wanted to be, he confessed during one such moment, his fingers tracing the scar on her wrist. Before the violence became necessity. Their peaceful interlude shattered when Salvatore cornered Emilio in his study. Through the heavy oak door, Miriam heard their argument escalate. The Venucci alliance isn't optional, Salvatore's voice rose. You're risking everything we've built over some American girl with a convenient scar. Convenient? Emilio's tone turned dangerous. You were there that night. You know who she is. Which is precisely why she's dangerous. Your father would never— My father is dead, Emilio cut him off, and I'm reconsidering the entire arrangement. The resulting silence felt deadly. Don't let your guilt over one childhood act destroy your family's future, Salvatore warned before storming out. That evening, the rehearsal dinner transformed the grand dining room into a showcase of Ricci power and wealth. Candlelight gleamed off silver and crystal as Sicily's most influential families gathered to celebrate. The peaceful facade cracked when Paolo Venucci arrived unannounced with his daughter Lucia. The room's temperature seemed to drop as conversations halted. Lucia's designer gown and perfect makeup couldn't hide her fury as she spotted Miriam standing near Emilio. I didn't realize my fiancé's wedding planner required such intimate supervision, she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Paolo stepped forward, his smile sharp as a blade. "We were concerned when you postponed our meeting, Emilio. I see now what's been occupying your attention." The room held its breath, waiting for Emilio's response. He set down his wineglass with deliberate care and met Paolo's gaze. "Since you've raised the subject," his voice carried clearly, "let me be direct. There will be no alliance marriage. The Ricci family will find another way to maintain peace." The shocked silence broke into furious whispers. Paolo's face darkened with rage, while Lucia's perfect composure cracked. "You would insult our family this way, over some common—" "Choose your next words carefully," Emilio's soft tone carried more menace than a shout. Later, alone in his study, Emilio pulled Miriam close. "I've lived my life by their rules, killed by their orders," he murmured against her hair. "The only pure choice I ever made was saving you. I won't let them take away my chance to choose again." Their kiss deepened with desperate passion, months of tension finally breaking. His touches erased every doubt, every fear, until there was only them and the night ahead. Dawn found Miriam slipping from Emilio's bed, her body pleasantly sore and her heart fuller than she'd ever known possible. She needed to check final preparations before the wedding guests arrived. The envelope waited under her door, innocent-looking but heavy with secrets. Her hands trembled as she examined its contents. Surveillance photos of her father, meeting with FBI handlers, official documents detailing his undercover work, investigating the Ricci family's shipping operations. The evidence was undeniable. Her father hadn't been an innocent victim caught in mob violence. He'd been a federal agent whose work had directly led to the deaths of several Ricci members. The fire that claimed his life wasn't random. It was retaliation. Miriam sank to the floor, the photos scattering around her. Her entire mission to find Emilio, the story she'd built her life around, was founded on a lie. The tragic fire that connected them wasn't fate. It was justice by Mafia standards. Her stomach churned as implications hit her. If others discovered this truth, her position within the compound would shift from treasured guest to mortal enemy. The daughter of a federal agent who'd infiltrated their organization and caused multiple deaths would find no mercy here, regardless of Emilio's protection. The wedding preparations continued outside her window, oblivious to her world crumbling. Workers called to each other as they arranged chairs and hung final decorations. Tomorrow, Gianna would walk down that aisle, while Miriam's fate hung by a thread as fragile as the truth. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Ricci estate as workers rushed through final wedding preparations. Miriam stood before the mirror in her suite, her reflection showing dark circles beneath haunted eyes. She hadn't slept, the documents about her father burning like hot coals in her trembling hands. The hallways bustled with staff carrying flowers and linens, barely noticing as she made her way to Emilio's study. She found him at his desk, already immaculate in his morning suit. He looked up, his expression softening at her appearance, then hardening as he registered her distress. "When were you going to tell me?" Miriam's voice cracked as she dropped the photos on his desk. "About who my father really was?" Emilio's jaw tightened as he examined the scattered surveillance images. "My investigators confirmed it 3 weeks ago," he admitted, his tone carefully controlled. "I've been trying to find the right way." 3 weeks? The betrayal cut deep. "You've known all this time and said nothing." "What would you have had me say?" He stood, circling the desk. "That your father was a federal agent who got himself killed by infiltrating my family. That the fire wasn't random but a deliberate hit after his cover was blown." Miriam stepped back, bile rising in her throat. "Did you know, that night when you saved me, did you know what they were doing?" "I was 13, Emilio's voice softened. "I only knew I was supposed to watch and learn how the family dealt with threats. I didn't understand the full story until years later when I took control and reviewed all our operations." "So saving me was what? An act of teenage rebellion?" The pain in her chest threatened to overwhelm her. "It was the only pure thing I've ever done." He reached for her, but she flinched away. The door opened abruptly as Salvatore burst in, his face tight with urgency. "The Venuccis have called for blood," he announced without preamble. "Paolo is demanding satisfaction for the public insult to his daughter." Emilio's posture shifted instantly, the vulnerable man replaced by the calculating Don. "Let them try," he said coldly. "We're stronger than they are." "This isn't about strength," Salvatore argued. "It's about tradition and respect. You've broken both by rejecting the alliance so publicly." As they debated strategy, Miriam watched Salvatore with growing clarity. His timing was too perfect, his glances at the scattered photos too knowing. He had left the envelope, using her father's true identity as a weapon. The morning dissolved into a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Miriam moved through her duties mechanically, coordinating with vendors and directing staff while her mind raced with implications. During the pre-wedding celebration, as guests began arriving and champagne flowed freely, Salvatore cornered her in a quiet hallway. "Such a shame about your father," his smile didn't reach his eyes. "A federal agent who thought he could infiltrate our world. Some might say his death was justified." "What do you want?" Miriam forced herself to meet his gaze. I want my nephew to remember who he is." Salvatore stepped closer. "The wedding reception will be chaotic. Accidents happen in chaos. By tomorrow, Emilio will return to his responsibilities without the distraction of childhood fantasies." The threat hung clear in the air between them. "Emilio won't let you. Emilio knows what needs to be done." Salvatore cut her off. "Why do you think he never told you the truth about your father?" The suggestion that Emilio might be complicit in planning her death shattered something inside Miriam. She watched him across the courtyard, commanding and distant among his captains, and wondered if she'd been fooling herself all along. The wedding preparations provided perfect cover for her escape. She slipped away during a chaotic moment when florists were arguing about centerpiece placement, using servant corridors she'd carefully mapped during her weeks of captivity. Her small bag contained only essentials: documents, cash, and a burner phone she'd hidden away. As evening settled over the estate and wedding guests arrived in earnest, Emilio noticed Miriam's absence. His growing concern turned to fury when security reported finding her room empty. He tore through the estate, searching for her, until evidence of her escape became undeniable. The confrontation with Salvatore happened in the family's private wing, away from guests but witnessed by several guards. "Where is she?" Emilio's voice was deadly quiet. "Gone, as she should be," Salvatore replied calmly. "The federal agent's daughter was a liability we couldn't afford. My men will ensure she doesn't become a problem." Emilio's reaction was explosive. He slammed his uncle against the wall, forearm pressed against his throat. "You arranged this?" The guards moved forward but stopped at Emilio's murderous glare. "Someone had to remember our priorities," Salvatore choked out. "The Vannucci's already had men watching her. I simply provided an opportunity." "She is under my protection," Emilio roared, his control finally snapping. His fist connected with Salvatore's face before the guards dared intervene. "Anyone who touches her signs their own death warrant." But even as he raged, reports came in, confirming his worst fears. Miriam had fled the estate, and Vannucci soldiers had been tracking her movements even before her escape. She had disappeared into a city crawling with enemies, believing herself betrayed by the man who loved her. The coffee grew cold beside Miriam as she huddled in the cramped storage room of Café Luna. Sophia, her old study-abroad friend, kept watch through the front windows while pretending to wipe down tables. Miriam's phone buzzed again. Emilio's 20th call in 2 hours. She stared at his name on the screen until it went dark. "He's tearing the city apart looking for you," Sophia whispered through the cracked door. "The news says there's been violence in 3 districts." Miriam closed her eyes, fighting the urge to answer his calls. Salvatore's words echoed in her mind. Emilio knows what needs to be done. Could the man who held her during the storm, who confessed she was his one pure choice, really have planned her death? The bell above the cafe door chimed. Sophia's sharp intake of breath made Miriam's blood run cold. Heavy footsteps crossed the floor. "We know she's here," a man's voice said in Italian. "Make this easy on yourself." The storage room door burst open before Miriam could move. 3 Vannucci soldiers filled the doorway, their suits immaculate despite the summer heat. The leader smiled coldly. "Paolo sends his regards." They took her to a compound on the outskirts of the city, a modern fortress masked as a villa. In the wood-paneled study where they held her, Miriam learned the truth from the guards' nervous conversations. Emilio had gone mad with rage upon discovering her disappearance. He'd tortured Salvatore for hours before executing him personally, shocking the family with his brutality against his own blood. "He's hunting everyone connected to your disappearance," one guard told her, both impressed and terrified. 3 families have already fallen. The old alliances are burning. Miriam absorbed this while working at her restraints. Years of self-reliance had taught her patience and resourcefulness. When the younger guard brought her water, she noticed his inexperience, his hesitation to get too close. The compound erupted in gunfire just as she managed to free one hand. The young guard rushed to the window, providing the opening she needed. She grabbed the heavy crystal decanter from the desk and swung hard, catching him in the temple. He crumpled as the first explosion rocked the building. Through the window, she saw black SUVs surrounding the compound. Men in tactical gear moved with military precision, led by a familiar figure in a blood-stained white shirt. Emilio had found her. She retrieved the guard's gun just as the study door burst open. Emilio stood in the doorway, suit jacket discarded, shirt crimson with other men's blood. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other across the chaos. "You came," she whispered. "I'll always come for you." His voice was raw. "Even if you run to the ends of the earth." The moment shattered as more gunfire erupted in the hallway. Emilio moved with lethal grace, eliminating 2 Venucci soldiers who tried to flank them. Together they fought their way through the compound, moving in perfect synchronization despite never having trained together. They were almost to the exit when Miriam saw the sniper on the balcony above. Without hesitation, she shoved Emilio aside as the shot rang out. He staggered, red blooming across his chest, but still managed to return fire, taking down the shooter. "No, no, no!" Miriam pressed her hands against his wound as he slumped against the wall. His blood was warm and terrifying against her skin. "Worth it," he gasped, his hand finding her face. "I've belonged to you since the day I carried you from those flames. Everything I've done, everything I've become, it was always leading me back to you." His eyes fluttered closed as his security team reached them, radioing desperately for medical support. 2 weeks later, Miriam sat beside Emilio's bed in a secluded villa on the Amalfi coast. The room's French doors stood open to catch the sea breeze, white curtains dancing in the afternoon light. His recovery had been slow but steady, giving them time to rebuild trust through long conversations about the past and uncertain future. The Ricci family had been transformed. Those loyal to Salvatore were eliminated or exiled. New alliances formed with families who respected Emilio's display of strength and devotion. His brutality in hunting down those who threatened Miriam had become underworld legend. When he was strong enough to walk, they spent hours on the terrace overlooking the Mediterranean. Here, watching the sun paint the water gold, Emilio made his final offer. "I've arranged everything," he said quietly. "New identity, unlimited resources, connections in any country you choose. You can disappear, build a safe life, far from all this." His hand trembled slightly as he gestured to encompass his violent world. "It's my final act of love, letting you go." Miriam turned to study his face, seeing both the ruthless Don and the wounded boy who had carried her to safety. "There's a third option," she said. "We change the rules of your world together." His eyes widened as she continued. "I didn't spend years searching for you out of gratitude or obsession. I came because no other man has ever made me feel truly alive." She took his hand, pressing it against her heart. "You saved me once from fire. Let me save you now from loneliness." Mediterranean sunlight sparkled off the Tyrrhenian Sea, casting golden rays across Villa Ricci's terraced gardens. White roses and fragrant jasmine adorned every surface, their petals dancing in the warm breeze. The scene was a far cry from the violence that had marked their journey here. Miriam stood before the antique mirror in what was now their master suite, smoothing the silk of her custom-made gown. The dress was a masterpiece of Italian craftsmanship. Cream-colored lace overlaying silk with subtle security modifications that acknowledged their world's dangers. A small knife was expertly concealed in the bodice, accessible but invisible. Gianna entered, now a fierce ally after witnessing her brother's transformation. "The security team's report all clear," she said, adjusting Miriam's cathedral veil. "Every guest has been triple-checked. Even the priest was vetted." Miriam smiled, touching the crescent-shaped scar on her wrist. No longer a reminder of trauma, but a symbol of destiny. "How's your brother holding up?" "Terrifying the staff with his perfectionism," Gianna laughed. "He's checked the security formations 12 times. You'd think he was preparing for battle instead of his wedding." In many ways, it was both. The guest list represented a carefully curated selection of allies who supported their vision for the future: legitimate business leaders, reformed family heads, and trusted new partners. Those who clung to the old ways of corruption and violence had been systematically removed from power over the past 6 months. The transformation hadn't been bloodless. Emilio's reputation for ruthless efficiency had only grown, but now it served a different purpose. He eliminated threats to their new order with surgical precision, while Miriam's strategic mind helped build something sustainable in its place. Outside, 300 guests filled the garden terrace, Private security teams maintained a subtle but impenetrable perimeter. Snipers were positioned on nearby rooftops, not for threat, but protection. The old and new worlds merged seamlessly in their unique version of a fairy tale. When Miriam emerged onto the flower-lined aisle, the gathered crowd stood. But her eyes fixed solely on Emilio, powerful and elegant in his custom tuxedo. The hardened Don who had once threatened her life now looked at her with undisguised devotion. She noted the subtle bulge of his shoulder holster under his jacket. Some habits couldn't be broken, yet his hands were gentle as they took hers before the priest. Those same hands that had dealt death and violence now trembled slightly as they exchanged rings. The traditional ceremony carried extra weight in their world. Each vow was both a personal promise and a public declaration of alliance. Their union represented not just love, but a new way forward for the families who had chosen to follow their lead. When Emilio spoke his personally written vows, his voice carried across the hushed gathering. 20 years ago, I carried an innocent girl from the flames and lost my own innocence in the process. Today she carries my name, my heart, and the future of our family. What was broken in fire has been reforged in love. Miriam's response acknowledged both their past and future. From ashes, we've built something new. Through darkness, we found light in each other. I take you as my husband, my partner, and my home, wherever that journey leads us. Their kiss sealed more than marriage vows. It represented the culmination of a 20-year journey from tragedy to triumph. The applause that followed wasn't just for the couple, but for the hope they represented. The reception showcased their new world order. Former rivals sat together, discussing joint ventures instead of territory disputes. Legitimate business leaders mingled with reformed family heads, building bridges between shadows and light. Emilio kept Miriam close as they moved among their guests, his hand never leaving the small of her back. She'd learned to read the subtle tensions in his body, the way he positioned himself between her and potential threats, how his fingers would brush his concealed weapon when unknown guests approached. But there was also genuine joy in his interaction with their closest allies. The cold Don had learned to smile, to trust, to build instead of destroy. His reputation for brutal efficiency remained, but now it protected a vision of progress rather than pure power. They shared their first dance to a classical Italian love song, moving together with the synchronization that had once helped them survive firefights. Now that deadly grace was transformed into something beautiful. Having second thoughts about marrying the monster, Emilio murmured against her ear as they danced. Miriam's hand tightened on his shoulder, where she knew a fresh scar lay under his jacket, taken while protecting her during their most recent challenge to the New Order. The only monster here is the one we're creating together, she replied. A legitimate empire built on something stronger than fear. His low laugh held genuine warmth. And what's that, my love? Hope, she said simply. Hope and a very efficient security team. The celebration continued as sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Their guests danced, dined, and forged new connections under the watchful eyes of their protection details. This was their version of happily ever after, love tempered by vigilance, joy guarded by necessary violence. The crescent moon rose over the sea, its shape echoing the scar that had brought them together. Miriam and Emilio stood on their private balcony, taking a moment alone between social obligations, his arms wrapped around her from behind, solid and secure. La mia salvezza, he whispered against her neck. My salvation. La mia forza, she returned. My strength. They had rewritten the rules of their world, proving that even in the darkest circumstances, love could create its own path to redemption. Their union wasn't just a marriage, it was a revolution disguised as a love story.